Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. I'm very blessed. I have Erik with me today. Erik, tell us about yourself.
Name's Erik Lundeen. I am the adult discipleship pastor currently at Village Church of Gurnee, up in Gurnee, Illinois, northern Illinois, not too far from the Wisconsin border. And only been here about 9 months. Before that, finished a PhD up in the history of Christianity at Baylor University down in Texas, and lived all over the place before that. Wisconsin, Boston, Los Angeles. I've hopped around a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure that's like 5 stories all on its own of all the travels and excitement of that. But I'm very blessed and excited to have you on today. You as well have a podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and about all sorts of things about what it is, where it came from, your heart behind it. But we're going to just start before we get too deep. And I just want you to give us the elevator pitch. You meet someone for the first time, and you're like, yeah, I've got a podcast. Oh, I only got a minute. What is it?
So it is called the History of Christianity Podcast. Very functional name, tells you right what it's about. History of Christianity Podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, all the usual places. Hosted by myself and 2 friends, Anna and Skylar. And what it is it tries to bring cutting-edge academic research on church history to everyday Christians, whether that's pastors, the interested person in the pew, the interested layperson, or a Bible college student, maybe a grad school student who's kind of interested in these things, and take research that's going on in the academy that usually doesn't filter down to the church, but that we think has relevance for everyday life as a Christian, and present it in an accessible way.
There you go. Wonderful. Simple. But not simple. The simple explanation of something beautiful and large. But as with anything, it had to start somewhere. Where did this journey start for you?
There's a couple ways I could answer it. On the personal level, I was not interested in church history or the history of Christianity until probably my second year of grad school and seminary. So that's a longer story. But the podcast specifically, this was maybe halfway through my time as a PhD student, studying this kind of stuff, doing tons of reading, seminars, networking, going to conferences. Meanwhile, before that, I had been a pastor for a while between my master's and PhD, and I was interested in going back into pastoral ministry. And there were a lot of podcasts out there that would talk about theology with authors, or talk about topics on studying the Bible. But the stuff I was studying, church history, I wasn't aware of anyone who was trying to sort of bring that down at a popular level. And so the question was kind of bridging this gap between academy and church. How can this stuff that I'm learning, that me and my friends are learning, that we feel like has a lot of relevance for being a Christian in the 21st century, how can we help share that with others in a way that they'll understand, knowing that church history is not always the most popular topic in churches.
Right.
It's kind of the neglected, it's the Cinderella of topics, you know? We know a little, we don't know a lot, and we don't really know where to go always.
Oh. So where did you meet your co-hosts then?
So they were both PhD students with me at Baylor. They're both close to finishing up now as well, but they're still down there. And yeah, we're friends and like to hang out, and we all liked studying the same things, and we thought we'd talk about it anyways.
Yeah.
Let's record it.
Put a microphone in front of us. Yeah. Exactly. So then get in a little bit deeper. What is a typical episode? How does it work? What would if a listener wanted to really tune in and gain, you've piqued their interest, you got them with a little bit of I'm very interested in church history, or maybe they're I have no idea what that means. Mm-hmm. Give them the full bit.
So our episodes, similar to a lot of podcasts, we do an interview format. So basically each episode, or we usually split it into 2 episodes, we interview some leading scholar in the history of Christianity. So usually a professor teaching at a university or a seminary, something like that. And we talk to them either about a book they've recently written or about their research area in general. We're on our 2nd season right now, but maybe this will give you a feel. The first season we tied it around the theme of becoming a historian. So trying to pique interest in church history, we started by asking all of these scholars who are major people within their fields, how did you start to care about this stuff? You've done this as your life, as your career, but I'm sure it was not always that way. So what got you interested in this generally, and then in whatever they study specifically? And now we're on a 2nd season that we've titled Expanding the Narrative. And the basic idea there is that whatever we do happen to know of church history in the church, which is usually not a lot, it usually is sort of the narrative that would have been told 100 years ago. So it's very Western-centric. It's centered on Europe and then North America, even though Christianity's been a global phenomenon ever since the beginning. It's been in China since like the 7th century. You know, even though we think of Chinese Christianity as a modern phenomenon and stuff. So it's been global for a long time. We're trying to expand kind of a stereotypical narrative and interview people who focus on a lot of times non-Western subjects, kind of non-traditional subjects in a certain way, and give us a bigger view of how broad and wide and deep Christianity is and has been historically.
So give us a picture then, like starting as well with like a couple of examples of like, who are some of these guests, and then lead that into like, how do you find these guests? How do you source these guests? How do you invite them to be on your show? Because like, these sound like very busy people also at the same time.
They are busy people. This was one of the benefits of doing a PhD is, you're going to conferences, you're doing your own research, writing your dissertation, you're getting to know people in your own particular field. So my two co-hosts, Anna and Skylar, and I, we all study quite different things. I study like European Christianity in the 15th to 17th centuries, really. Anna studies medieval Ethiopian Christianity in like the 11th to 15th centuries. Skylar is really interested in contemporary Pentecostalism and evangelicalism globally, especially in South America and places like that. So we kind of all have our own networks of people we know, and so we would get to know people and think, wow, what this person studies is really fascinating, but they might not be the kind of person who is going to speak to a church audience typically, or give a seminar at a church or whatever. Some of them are Christians, some of them are not practicing Christians, but they're really interested in the history of Christianity still. And so we'd reach out to them, people we get to know. Sometimes we've cold called people.
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful thing about doing a podcast. People have been incredibly generous with us. Some of my favorite episodes have been people we didn't know at all. And we read a book by them and loved it and just reached out. And a wonderful thing about academics is they're not always asked to share it with the popular audience or to speak to. So usually they love the idea of, someone outside the kind of the circle of 20 other people in their little field who study that stuff. Like learning about it. It might be the most people they ever hear about, who read their book.
Oh, that's really exciting. So speaking of exciting as well, like obviously then you're getting to meet all of these people you've never met before by doing this, and some I'm sure that you've wanted to meet because you've read their books and stuff like that, and great opportunities. What's been like the most exciting thing for you, or maybe a big thing that you've learned from this? Because I know, like I've learned from it. I know the audience, if and when they listen to it, they're going to learn because it's totally different than what most of us usually get, as you're saying. So what's a way you've grown from this?
Well, because the format of the thing is sort of a interview the expert type thing, even though we all know a little bit about it going in, or maybe we've read a book, or depending on the topic, know a little more or a little less about it, in every episode, 90% of what the person's saying is new information that I'm learning probably. So, we've had some really fun guests for me personally. We interviewed a scholar, Justo Gonzalez, who's sort of like the godfather of church history in the last 50 years, I feel like. He's written probably one of the most popular and widely used textbooks on church history in seminaries and divinity schools. It's what I was assigned to read as a master's student. So I've read probably thousands of pages of this guy. Brilliant scholar, brilliant churchman. He was really generous, sat down, talked with us for an hour about theological education in Hispanic communities in North America and church history, which is not an area, that have tons of personal familiarity with. So I learned a lot there. Another favorite episode, we recently posted an interview with a woman, Dr. Samantha Kelly, who teaches at Rutgers University. And Dr. Kelly, similar to my friend Anna, but she's a specialist on medieval Ethiopian Christianity. So Ethiopia claims to be the first Christian nation. we think of Christianity, if we know anything about the early church, starting with the Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. Right around that same time, the entire nation of Ethiopia, before the Roman Empire, goes Christian, and has been continuously formally Christian ever since.
Huh.
Even in the Middle Ages, Islam kind of overruns North Africa, and Ethiopia is sort of this Christian island in a sea of Islamic nations, is always Christian. And so we got to talk to her about, just tell us about this thing we know very little about, and how Christianity has been there in North Africa since the beginning.
Wow.
And she talked to us about, some of the relevance for our contemporary faith. She shared a wonderful story about the wise men or magi who come to visit Jesus. And we in the West, because of carols and hymns like We Three Kings, we typically think that there's 3 of them.
Yeah.
If you've grown up Catholic, we've assigned names to them traditionally,
sure.
the whole 9 yards. In Ethiopia, I don't remember the number, but there's a lot more than 3. They think of there being like 11 of them or something, and always have.
There's a whole caravan.
Uh-huh. And the thing is, the Bible doesn't actually say how many there were either way, but sometimes we don't realize that until we hear a new tradition, we hear another way of looking at it from a different part of the globe, and realize, just like we have our own tradition, they have their own too. Mm-hmm. There's beauty in both, and actually either can help us to read the biblical text with fresh eyes when we realize all of us in this instance have kind of put something on the Bible that's not there.
Absolutely.
But that can lead us to ask new questions about, like maybe we don't actually know how many there were, but what do we know about these guys and their significance?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I love about your podcast, because I'm a few episodes in now, and it's exciting to me, even just for the fact of I love, especially with podcasts, listening to things that I can tell that the hosts are really excited about. Because, like, if they're not excited about it, why should I be excited about it? Mm-hmm. And, like, hearing just the 3 of you just talk about it, like, let alone, audience, listen to the first episode, and you will instantly know, yes, these people are passionate about church history and love it. Like, you can't listen to that first episode and not get that from the episode. And it makes me want to listen to more. Because, like, it's stuff that, as you said, like, I've never heard any of these things before. I've never been in an opportunity or places that I would digest it. I'm your everyday person. Like, I'm not going to seminary. Like, I do what I am excited to do at church with stuff like that. But even at church, there's not always the amount of time to get into some of that deep history stuff. So it's like, on my own time, I can find time. And it's like hearing that and hearing people be excited for it. I'm like, I want to listen to this. Yeah, okay, next episode, let's go. But it's funny at the same time, too, and we were discussing this recently, it's definitely one of those podcasts that's like, I got to be ready. I got to get ready to digest this. Because, like, I was doing some work at my house one day, and I was, like, trying to listen to it, and I'm like, I'm not getting anything done in the house because I'm paying attention. I'm like trying to work on my floor and I'm going like quarter speed because I'm going, and I'm like, I just got to sit down with some tea and actually listen to this. So audience, I really want to encourage you, if that's something that sounds interesting to you, or maybe you're not sure if it is, I would still give it a try because it is, let alone, as I said, people that are excited about something. And if you get excited about people being excited, it's worth it for that alone. And you'll learn something. And as Eric's saying, it's like, it'll make you look at scripture different. It'll make you look at traditions differently. And that's great. So Eric, for you referenced it a little bit, but if people want to know more, if people want to connect more to the podcast, where should they go?
Look it up. Again, Spotify or iTunes. So it's called you got to put the word the in, The History of Christianity Podcast. We've got a Twitter account that we post on. Some of the ways we've networked, a lot of professors and academics, Twitter is the platform of choice for a lot of them. So we've met some people solely over Twitter. We actually have one professor who we ended up interviewing. It was a great interview, who right after we started the podcast, within a couple of weeks, reached out to us over Twitter and said, like, hey, I'm really interested in this too. Can we talk about my book that I just published this past year? And so we ended up having him on a little bit later. That episode still hasn't been released, but it will be soon. And so, yeah, that would be the place to go. We don't have a website or anything. The podcast is sort of the product itself. Yeah, you can find it.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much for spending this time with me and the audience. And audience, thank you so much, as always, for listening. I couldn't do this without you.